So lacrosse happened.
It did.
Go.
You mentioned a couple of thrilling lacrosse games. What have those two games been like to call for you?
Yeah. I mean, just incredibly fun, honestly, is the first thing that comes to mind. And I have fun doing any lacrosse game, really, especially with Kyle. We always have a blast. But, yeah, these were like peak lacrosse in terms of the first game. I guess the first half wasn't a whole lot of fun to call that when they were struggling against Harvard. But ever since then, it has been just up and down, great lacrosse. Everything that I always say about lacrosse, like, we always tell people if you watch a game or someone like Paulie that's like, maybe I do need to get into it. If you give it a chance, you're going to like it. And I think these past 2 weeks have really been a lot of fun for any type of lacrosse fan.
Has Kyle set a new record for most woos in back-to-back games?
I think so, yeah. I mean, there was 19 goals, plus it was 4 woos on the final call
right.
alone. So, yeah. And then we get into the post-game show, and I went on like a summary of the game or whatever, and I turned it to him for a thought, and he was like, I just have one thing to say. And then he wooed again. Yeah. So that's all he's got left in him, I think.
All right. So, I asked Mike McAllister earlier. I want to get your thoughts as well. So this team ended the regular season with 3 straight losses. They've gone on a 4-game winning streak, and here they are in the Final Four. Has there been anything noticeable that you have seen that has changed from the losing streak to the winning streak? Or is it just a case of they were playing really good teams before and, it was a play here or there went against them, and now those plays are going in their favor? I mean, what do you make of how they were able to turn this thing around so quickly?
I do think it was a lot of just they were playing really tough teams and the games didn't go their way. But I would say it comes back to the culture that the team has been really talking about throughout the season, and they've had that mindset since the early season losses to Maryland and Harvard, and when they took those setbacks early on, and they come on here and they talk about next play and winning each day, and it becomes kind of a cliche, but I think they just had the right mindset throughout the season because they went through those losses early on. And I think you can't take for granted that this was their second time playing in that game, the quarterfinal game. And I was thinking about the way they started the third quarter was the exact opposite of how the third quarter went last year in the quarterfinal game. Denver came out of the halftime break, and it was a tie game at halftime. They scored 5 goals in a row in what was a lower scoring game and pretty much put the game away. They ended up losing 10-8 last year in the quarters, and I don't think Denver scored a goal in the fourth quarter, if I remember correctly. So it was like, all right, they exercised their demons in the third quarter. Then, of course, it wasn't going to be an easy way to break the Final Four drought. So they made it interesting, and Princeton rallied back, and that made it such a wild game there, the way the fourth quarter transpired. But I just think they've faced a lot of adversity this year. There's been ups and downs in individual games. There's been ups and downs in the season to the point where they feel like they can go through anything. And I did feel like being around the team a little bit and getting to see them kind of in the hotel before the game, I sensed that there was like a little bit more looseness this year going into this quarterfinal game. I think Kyle and I even talked about it. Can't remember if it was off air or on air, but last year it did feel like, oh yeah, they're a little tight going into this quarterfinal game. Like this is a big deal, but you can't really blame them because they were sophomores then and it was their first time in that game. And this time around, I think they just kind of had like good vibes that, hey, we were here last year and now we're ready to make this step. And I think they played like that and it worked out that way.
I don't know how much you got to talk to the players afterwards or spend any time with the players afterwards, but do you have a feel for, I guess, how they are reacting to this win? Was their overwhelmed feeling one of relief? Was it excitement? Was it job's not done yet? What kind of vibe are you getting from how they're handling the win?
I think there is some sense of relief. Maybe they wouldn't say that, but I almost view it as like the way Rory McIlroy just had that like outpouring of emotion in the Masters. And I was joking with Joey after the game and Joey's dad, how they kind of brought up that he, in the media thing afterwards, or right on the field afterwards, said like, yeah, I guess I can dodge, and I guess we can win the big game. And I was like, you guys should have gone Rory McIlroy on it and just been like, what are you going to talk about next year now that the Final Four drought is over? So I do think there's a little bit of a sense of, hey, this is kind of house money now, even though that sounds weird. You're going to, in theory, a bigger stage, and you're playing only tougher opponents the rest of the way, in theory. But I do think that they kind of have that weight off their shoulders. It's a successful season in my eyes, regardless of what happens. And, you're probably not supposed to win the national championship it would be like ahead of the rebuild to get it this year. So maybe now you just go in with a little bit of a house money attitude and go do it. I mean, now you're 2 games away from doing it, which is exciting.
All right, let's talk about what's next, and that is Maryland, a team they've already seen, and it is certainly going to be a contrast in styles. We know Maryland wants to be slow and methodical and make you work for everything you get on both ends of the field. I guess size up this matchup for us, and is this the most difficult opponent in terms of style of play that Syracuse could face?
Yeah, it's just so opposite from how Syracuse plays. I think you guys have hit on all the right things today when you're talking about the matchup. It really, like, Maryland is the antithesis of how Syracuse gets after it, and John Tillman's approach is the antithesis of how Gary Gait wants his team to play. I mean, you watch Maryland, it feels, and this sounds maybe too harsh because I think their style has worked, and I think there's something to be said for that. They always get to the Final Four, and you got to give them a lot of credit. But it feels a little robotic or just like methodical, I guess is another word that comes to mind. And Syracuse is free-flowing and creative and try a behind-the-back shot whenever you want. As long as you practice it, Gary Gait is fine with you taking in the game. So it's the opposite style. It's also fascinating. I mean, Gary's talked about this, how in a different world, he very easily could have been the Maryland men's lacrosse head coach. And he thought a couple times that he was going to have that job. I mean, when it came open a couple times ago, I think they basically promised him the job. It didn't come through. So then he said, all right, I'll go work and be the Syracuse women's lacrosse assistant. Then when John Tillman was hired, they offered him the job. And he said, actually, no, I'm good in Syracuse now. Like, at this point in my career, this is where my family is. This is where we want to be. So, it's just a fascinating matchup from that angle as well. And then you factor in Maryland really has had Syracuse's number. They beat them 7 straight times. Some of these games have been close recently, but it feels like Maryland has been that kryptonite for Syracuse for the last decade or so. So all those wrinkles make it definitely an interesting matchup.
So how do you go about beating this team? And I guess how imperative is it that they get off to a fast, they meaning Syracuse, get off to a fast start and play from ahead? Although they did in the first meeting, right? They were up at halftime and didn't win. But I guess how do you go about beating this team?
You almost have to play from ahead to beat them, really, because Maryland just slows the game down so much. The good news is Syracuse has struggled clearing at times this year, and Maryland basically doesn't ride. They just say, hey, bring it across, and we just want our defense to be settled as much as possible because we believe in our defense. So Syracuse does get some transition chances against other teams. They're basically not going to get any transition chances against Maryland. They're trying to get into 6-on-6 lacrosse, Maryland is, as much as possible. So I think if Syracuse can get a good game from John Mullen, that's a big key. And if he can win some faceoffs out of the front, then you can almost get some odd man rushes against the Maryland defense some. I do think it's very important for them to get the lead, and then you can kind of dictate tempo a little bit, because I think Maryland's Achilles heel is they are a team that probably struggles coming from behind. And I think Mike McAllister was spot on when he made the comparison to Virginia basketball. For anyone that's listening and trying to think of a correlation, it really is kind of like that, where they want to play at a certain style and they want to play at a certain pace, and usually they get the lead and they can play at that pace and they can do their thing. It's also, it's really tough to get Maryland in the first game. Traditionally, they have struggled in the national championship game because Kyle always says it, and a lot of coaches say it in lacrosse, that first game on Saturday, the coaches win that game. The Monday game, the players have to win it, right? Because you can't really make adjustments or come up with as good of a game plan. But Tillman, with a week to prepare, like he has in the quarterfinals and in the first Final Four game, he has a very, very good record.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I do want to get back. So somebody brought up in our chat the whistle at the very end of regulation.
Yeah.
And I was curious about that as well. So can you explain what happened?
Yeah, so we were confused when it was going on because they really didn't do a good job explaining it, the referees. We just assumed it was offsides. It was offsides is what they called. Our coaches told me after the game, they said it was offsides. We went back and looked at it. We did not think we were offsides, or we didn't find a seventh player. And I talked to Gary, and he was like, yeah, I haven't even really gotten a chance to look at it. Who cares at this point? Like, it's a win. But yeah, it was very puzzling how they went about it. Also, if it was offsides, then I think it probably should have been called earlier, and it would have been with like 20 seconds left. So Yeah, it was a really weird way to end the game that way, and it seemed like even the TV call, watching that back, everyone was confused during it. I just assumed with Kyle, it was like the only thing I can think of flipping possession is offsides, and that's what our coaches said it was, but it didn't look like a blatant offsides to me when it happened.
No, it turned out to be no big deal, but obviously could have been if they had given him a little bit more time, and and especially given what happened the previous week with Harvard, who knows? Right. But they are moving on. Just to wrap up the conversation about Maryland, what kind of chance do you give Syracuse this game? If you have to handicap, is it 50-50? Do you give the edge to Maryland? Kind of where do you sit with that right now?
Yeah, I think if Syracuse is playing Maryland in the championship game, I would like their chances more for the reasons I laid out. I don't know. It's been tough to read this team all year, and it feels like when they're on, they are the best team in the country. So I would probably put it maybe slightly better than 50-50, and that's probably me being a little bit bullish on just the house money aspect of it and the fact that they've gotten to this point, and now it's like, let's go out there and ball and play our style. I also think, well, it does look like it's going to be chilly and maybe a little rainy again. That first version was such a rainy, sloppy day that really favored Maryland. I mean, 2 years ago, Syracuse really could have won against Maryland inside the Dome, and that was more of a high-scoring game. So the higher scoring the game, the better it will be for Syracuse. And if they can get to 11, 12 goals, I really do like their chances if it becomes a double-digit scoring game. It's just easier said than done. Maryland is very good, especially with a week to prepare. And it's interesting because it's not like Maryland has the most talented team ever. I mean, they really lack a true number one guy on offense. And I would say Princeton and Harvard are definitely more talented than them. But again, I think this is the toughest game they've had of the three because of the respect I have for Tillman and just the differing style that they're going to throw at Syracuse. Again, it'll be the second game on Saturday, right? Set to start around 2:30 or 3 o'clock, depending on how long Penn State and Cornell go. But Syracuse, Maryland, the second game on Saturday in the national semifinals. Tim, great stuff. I know you're heading there. Enjoy the trip, and I hope you call 2 games instead of just 1. Yeah, hopefully we get a national championship woo next time I talk to you guys. That'd be awesome. All right, Tim Leonard joining us here on the show. With that, we'll hit a timeout. Phone lines open the rest of the way. We're back after this on ESPN Radio.